reference to Remembrance Sunday, and I didn't realise it would look so small up there. I do apologise. Need to make it bigger next time. But as a child, I loved all things World War II, all things Second World War. And there's a photo, if you put that up, Blair, there's a photo of me and my brother dressed as soldiers, which we generally dressed as most Sundays. And that is in the back garden of my Auntie Dorothy's house. I'm the one in the beret. And I remember my granddad sorting it out for me, and he used to hurt my head, to twist it on my head tight. I think I had quite a cubically massive head as a child. And so that beret fit very snugly. And those spats around my ankles, they kept dropping off. But for the photograph, they managed to clip on and remain. So that's my twin brother next to me looking like a Russian soldier. He was always my enemy, only joking. So that's me and my brother enjoying being soldiers. And my mum's dad was my granddad, Robinson. And he was a tank driver during the Second World War. He drove the tank in North Africa and Italy and other places, but I don't know where else. And he would always tell us stories about the war. And me and my brother would love it. We'd love to hear his stories. And he used to pick us up from school in his Ford Capri. And it was a really cool one because he had quite a bit of money, but it was like top of the range, black, with quality seats and a sunroof. We used to like to climb up his car and dive in, much to his annoyance. But he would play his army tunes in the car. He was part of the 25th Royal Lancers, and they released some war album, and he would play it, and he'd hum along. I mean, my brother would just love it, feeling like we were soldiers in a tank. And so I grew up with that love of the Second World War, and we saw it as some kind of big, heroic adventure. And at school, the game we would love to play would be army. Let's all join on for a game of army, and me and my brother would make sure we were on the British side. And those ones, like, you're Germans, and you get that other side of the playground, and then you'd make the wing with a gun thumb, and that would be the Spitfire, and you'd fly around. And my little Theo, poor lad, when he joined St. Philip's, he was playing army one time at playtime, and he got banned from playing army, which is a bit daft, because boys like to be soldiers, don't they? And so me and my brother playing army a lot at school and hearing my granddad's stories. And for us, war seemed exciting, fun and heroic. And there was a time, probably 30 years ago to the day, me and my brother dressed as Grenadier Guards with a busby on our heads and our belts on and our black pants with a red stripe, feeling very smart. And we marched with my granddad Robinson down Morecambe Promenade to the cenotaph. His medals on, and we were there marching with him, and we saluted at the cenotaph. We were proud of what the soldiers had done, and we felt like soldiers ourselves. But there's no awareness that war isn't necessarily an epic battle of good versus evil, but actually war doesn't have clear goodies and clear baddies like we thought they used to have. War is a mud of heroes and villains, isn't it, on both sides. And my granddad, Savage, on my dad's side, my dad's dad, he never really spoke of the war. He was a physical training instructor for the Lancaster Regiment, and he was based in Malta, which got bombed day and night, and he would never really talk about the war. I'd know very little of what he did, if anything at all, to be honest. And so for him, there was something of the pain of war still there, and his silence was hiding that painful reality of his experience. And in war, there's no clear goodies or clear baddies, and on both sides there are winners and losers. And so growing up from this time where war seemed great, you start to realise that war is not a good thing. War might be at times necessary, but it is ultimately not really a good thing. And Remembrance Day began, which we are remembering today. Remembrance Day began on November the 11th, 1919, a year to the day after the end of the First World War. The First World War, which had rocked this nation probably far more than the Second World War ever did. It caused such devastation in families. More soldiers were killed in the First World War than we lost in the Second World War. And so the King George V, he gave an order that on the November the 11th, 1919 at 11 o'clock there would be a 2-minute silence, and he said this, or his press release said this. It said, all locomotion should cease, so that in perfect stillness the everyone concentrated on reverent remembrance of the glorious dead. And so every Armistice Day, or every Remembrance Day, whatever you want to call it, was held on November the 11th at 11 o'clock. And in the 1920s, people started to wear the poppies. And poppies have an amazing ability to grow amongst dead things and to grow amongst broken earth. And in the early 1800s, we had the Napoleonic Wars across Western Europe, lots of battles, and the poppies would grow where those battlefields had been. And so they were quite widespread across Western Europe. And again, during the First World War, these poppies began to grow in the battlefields. As early as 1915, the year after the start of the war, you see the artillery bombardments and the footfall of soldiers just churn the earth up. And if you can ever see pictures of it, it's just like a barren wasteland. There's no trees because they've just been blown up. It's just like a quagmire of mud. Yet within that, there's these poppies starting to grow. And in 1915, there was a poet called John McCrae. He was an army doctor, I think from Canada. And he unfortunately died in 1918 from pneumonia, which he caught on the battlefield as he was helping the soldiers in the medical tents. But in 1915, he wrote this poem, In Flanders Field, which I'm going to read. And this made him a bit of a celebrity in his day. This was a famous poem that got published and really expressed something of the war, the experience of the soldiers, but also the hope that they were still in the war, that would achieve something. These poppies was a sign of life and hope amongst death. And I'm going to read it to you, and I apologise that I don't quite have Laurence Olivier's voice or Donald's voice. Donald's upstairs with the youth. I could have got him to read it out because it would have been amazing. But you've got my northern tones, I'm afraid. So this is In Flanders Field, and it says, In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row that our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. And so this poem was taken as inspiration for the commemorating of the war and remembering the war dead. And Remembrance Sunday, which we are remembering today, came into practice after 1945, which shows you just the futility of war, because 21 years after the end of the First World War, an even greater war started, the Second World War. And the First World War had been known as a Great War, and some refer to it as the war to end all wars because of its just destructive nature and the shock it had upon civilized society. But as we know, it didn't. It actually just seemed to spiral into an even greater war with more death. The First World War saw 18 million people killed, 7 million of which were civilians. So there's no civilians killed in this country, but across Western Europe, 7 million were killed. But if you compare that with the Second World War, so the First World War, the Great War, the war to end all wars, whereas the Second World War saw roughly 18 million killed, which is 6 or 7 times more than the First World War. And 18 million is actually 3% of the 1940 population for the world. So 3% of the world was killed during the Second World War. And 55 million of those were civilians. So 55 million, the vast majority of those were civilians killed by direct conflict or through bombing or through murder or through war-related disease and famine. And in this country, we actually got off quite lightly. We got off quite lightly because with civilian death and military death, it was about 460,000, which is still a massive amount, one's too many in it, but 460,000. But we got off lightly because in contrast to the Soviet Union, they had 24 million of their soldiers and population killed by the Second World War. And the sad thing is that war will always happen until Jesus returns. And we can try our best to stop war, but sin and human greed and the devil seems to always move us towards war and towards conflict. The devil loves to fan the flames of war, doesn't he? He just wants to see people destroyed and killed. And Robert Runcie says this. He was a former archbishop, and he says, those who dare to interpret God's will must never claim him as an asset for one nation or group rather than another. War springs from the love and loyalty which should be offered to God being applied to some God substitute, one of the most dangerous being nationalism. So I don't believe God's on any side in war. Sometimes war seems necessary, but God's heart breaks over warfare. And since 1945, there have been 40 million war-related deaths and over 250 wars around the world. So even the Second World War and its devastation and its desire for the nations of the earth to work towards peace afterwards, done away with. What did it achieve? Some form of peace and defeat of an evil dictator, but in the end, it never creates total peace. And the poppy which we wear, which some of you have got on, which is great, the poppy has become a symbol of remembrance, remembering the fallen, but it's also a symbol of hope, because we have freedom today because of the lives that the soldiers have given for us. Soldiers have laid their lives down, airmen from the RAF have laid their lives down, seamen and medical corps, everyone who's involved in some way with the conflict have given their lives. People were killed in factories making armaments for the war, but they still gave their life. So we don't just remember the military people who gave their lives, but those who were civilians who were involved in the war effort. So it's a symbol of remembrance, but it's also hope, because we've got freedom today. And Jesus tells us in John 15 verse 13 that greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. There's an amazing story from the Second World War in one of the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. There was a group of people, and I don't quite know the fullness of the story, but I think somebody had escaped, and they were trying to work out who it was that had escaped, and that person was going to go into the cells and to be killed. And so this person wasn't owning up, and it brought out their barracks to try and work out what it was. And the normal practice was the whole barracks would be killed because they couldn't find the person. So the whole of that barracks would be killed. That section of the barracks in their hut, for example, might have been 30 to 50 people killed. But there's a priest. I don't know his name. It's just come to me now. It wasn't in my notes, but I don't know his name. But he stepped forward and he said, we don't know who it was, but I'm going to take their place. And he took their place and was killed on behalf of that person and on behalf of the whole of their hut. And the person who actually had escaped survived the war and told the story of how this guy had saved his life, had given his life so that he would survive and the whole people would survive. So there's amazing stories that come out. And there's no greater love than to give your life for someone else, is there? And God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever would believe in him would not die but would have everlasting life. And so Jesus is that great example of life for other people. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But as Christians, we are called to remember. As God's people, we are called to remember. And so today, this is something that we should have a almost automatic tendency to do, is to remember things. And we remember primarily Jesus and what he's done for us. It should be a daily thing. Like we take communion, which we'll do later on, but communion is not the only time to ever remember Jesus and what he's done. It's not just a one-off symbolic opportunity to remember him, but with our lives, with our day-to-day, we need to remember Jesus. And we don't remember as though we're trying to remember something we've forgotten, but we remember in the sense that we bring Jesus to the forefront of our thinking, to the forefront of all that we want to do with our lives. Because Jesus, if he is who he says he is, he's worth everything. There's nothing more important, because his eternal kingdom is number one priority. So your job and the way you work, your work, you're there for God. You're not there just because you earn a good bit of money and you're getting a pension. You're there for that, because that's a blessing. But you're there because God has called you to serve him in that place. And so everything we do, we need to be remembering Jesus. And in communion, we take emblems that represent his blood and his body, his sacrifice. But we've also got a greater symbol, similar to the poppy, that reminds us of death, but also of hope. And it's the cross. So on there, you've got the cross and the poppy together, because they both mean something very similar, which is that we have our freedom because of a life was given. And we have a hope because we have that freedom. And so the poppy is both a sign of remembering the dead, but also of hope, because let's do something with what they've given us. And in the same way, the cross is a symbol of death, that Jesus took our place. He died a painful death. But we also have freedom because he's alive. And he rose again. And we remember not only his death, but also the fact that he's alive. And he's in your life right now. And you might be thinking, Jesus, where are you? But you need to remember him. He's there. Somehow he's working in your life. Even in the darkest of nights, his light is there somewhere. He's working his way in and through your life. He never leaves us or forsakes us. And we've got freedom, the greatest freedom we could ever have, freedom to know God. Where sin and the devil love to separate us from God, Jesus has destroyed both death and the works of the devil. We can know God because of what Jesus has done on the cross. And we need to remember that. And sometimes we can just be very, I don't know if we can get into a religious routine that, we come to church, I'm a Christian, but what does being a Christian mean? It means that you believe that Jesus died and rose again. You believe that Jesus is Lord of your life. He's not just somebody that's done you a favour, but he's your Lord. And you need to submit your life to him and do what he tells you to do. As we read the Bible, there's stuff in there. It's not just information. It's there for transformation and for our obedience to follow him. And we need to do what the Bible tells us, because Jesus has won that freedom for us to do that. Freedom from being slaves to sin. Freedom from the devil. He's got no more unsettled claims against you. He doesn't own you no more. You've been bought at a price. You are Jesus's. Your body is not your own, so start doing with it something that honours God. Live your life for him. We've got freedom to know the Father who loves us, who wants to pour good things into our lives. And sometimes we can get so obsessed, I know I can, with things that hold us back, or we can get so obsessed with things that are so trivial, they don't really matter, but they can be so distracting. Yet Jesus calls us to remember, because as you remember, you do what he tells you to do. As you remember, you know him more. It's when you forget about him and you put him on the back burner that you begin to live a life that doesn't really resemble the life that God has called you to. And you see that in the wilderness with the Israelites. They forget the good stuff that God's done. They forget about him. He's rescued them out of Egypt, yet they're wanting to go back because at least they got a decent meal. They want to go back because at least they knew their routines. It was a bit hard, but at least we knew what was going to happen. We'd get a bit of a beating one day, but then at least we could do our own thing, in the sense of we could work on those bricks, making those bricks for the fair or whatever. And it's interesting that the Ark of the Covenant is called the Ark of the Testimony in a lot of places, because on there were symbols that God put on it. He put on a golden jar of manna. He also put on Aaron's rod that was budding, because although it was a stick, it was alive still. And he put those things on there. He instructed the Israelites to put those on the Ark of the Testimony as an example to them of what God has done. Stop forgetting about my ways and what I've done. Stop forgetting about me, because I'm right with you in the Ark. That's my presence. In there is the 10 Commandments, which you've got to follow to be my people and to be set apart. And so those Israelites, they were given every opportunity to remember God and what he'd done. But they were very good at putting God on the back burner and beginning to worship other things and becoming rebellious. And I say we can be the same. If Jesus isn't put as a priority in your life, he won't be a priority in your life. And we can struggle saying, God, you feel you're so distant. And there are times where God does seem distant, but often that's because of the choices that we're making or we're not making. And the more we press and seek after God, the more we find him. So I want to say today, if you're finding God is distant, remember him. Put him at the forefront of your thinking. Spend more time praying, spend more time reading your Bible, spend more time in worship, because you need that breakthrough. Sometimes we expect God to flick a switch. God, do it easy for me. But he's already done it easy for us on the cross. That's it. He's done it. We just have to respond, and the rest is up to us. He's not a puppet master. He doesn't control us by strings, but he invites us with his voice and with his heart to know him. And so remember Jesus today. Galatians 5 verse 1 says that it's for freedom that Christ has set us free. You are free, but you've got to learn what it means to be free. How do you live out this Christian walk? How do you live this freedom out? What do you need to do? So it's for freedom that Christ has set us free. It's like he's taken the chains off, the door is open in the prison, and he calls you to walk out into freedom. But some of us are quite happy to stay in our prison and say, actually, yeah, I still struggle with that. I've always struggled with it, always being part of my life. But Jesus is saying, walk away from it. Walk away and pursue freedom. It's in that freedom that we become free. Colossians 1, 12 to 14 says, and giving joyful thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. Colossians 2:15, he disarmed the spiritual rulers and authorities. He shamed them publicly by victory over them on the cross. And sometimes we give the devil more credit than he's due. And we think about him far too much, and we worry about him too much. He's defeated. There's no second thing about that. He doesn't need defeating. He's defeated, and we just have to push him back. And we need to stand and use all those spiritual armaments that God has given us in prayer, in the word of God, in worship, to see him get lost. Because where your light is shining, the devil can't stand. And you might think you're in the darkest place. Oh, my workplace, oh, it's awful. I'm not saying about ours, by the way. I'm just putting myself in, when I was a teacher, I used to hate it sometimes. Go in there, it's just full of all sorts of tensions, and you had difficult classes. But God had put me there to be light. And you might be in the worst workplace, but God has called you there to push back the darkness, bring hope, bring life, bring light. And Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 8, he says, remember Jesus Christ raised from the dead. So Timothy's been commissioned to be a leader. I think it was in Ephesus he was going to, which was a real spiritual hotbed. It was a difficult place to be a Christian, let alone a Christian leader. Yet Timothy's told to remember Jesus Christ raised from the dead. Remember Jesus, not the fact he died, but he's raised from the dead. He's alive. His kingdom is on the advance. His kingdom is growing. It's not shrinking back. The darkness is not pushing. But that's because the kingdom is on the move. And like in the Second World War, when the Allies and Normandy and started pushing back Hitler from France and from Italy in the south, he got more aggressive and they began to fight back more. And you had the Battle of the Bulge, which is not a post-Christmas thing. The Battle of the Bulge was where they tried to push and break through, and they had a very bitter conflict. And that's because the enemy knew he was defeated. And in the same way, the devil knows he's defeated. And so should we expect him just to lie back? No. He wants to fight back. But he's not going to win because he's defeated. And that is a good thing. So the cross is a place of death and a place of victory. And Jesus won the victory through his death, but he never stayed there. And I find it really off-putting when some Christians can be so defeatist, or Christians can be so negative about life. Jesus is alive. He's won the victory and he's on the move. And sometimes we just ignore the fact or forget the fact he's called us to do the stuff that he has done. He's called us to change the earth. And I think sometimes as Christians we need to remember that we've got a plan and a purpose for our lives, and that we're called on mission for him. And if you want your Christian life to get more exciting, get on mission with God. See God in your workplace. You are a sent person into your workplace. You are a sent person into your neighborhood to do something with God. He's there already. It's not like he's waiting for you to go and then he's going to join you. He's there already and he's saying, come and join me in renewing all things. And I think we need to get more excited about the mission of God. And sometimes we expect God, my life is not, I'm not happy, or my life is not like this or like that. And God wants to say, I think, look, you don't need all that in your life, you need me. I need to start joining me in my call for your life, because that is where you're going to find the fullness and your purpose. And purpose is not in money or comfort. It's not in necessarily even our health. It's in what God wants us to do and being with him and knowing him and doing the stuff that he calls us to do. And we've got a hope because he's begun a good work in us that he's going to bring through to completion. He's not left you. You might have messed up big time this week. We have all those weeks where we just mess up and we make bad choices. But God promises to continue and complete that good work in you. And I want to finish today by doing two things. The first thing is I want to do a 2-minute silence to remember the fallen military personnel and the civilians who gave their life for our freedom. But then I want to take communion and remember that sacrifice of Jesus and his amazing victory that we get to partner with and we get to have in our life. And so as we have this 2-minute silence in just a moment, I'll get my timer out. We're going to do exactly 2 minutes because that is only right. We're not going to try and second guess it. Oh, that felt like 2 minutes. And as you reflect, you might have lost a loved one in a war. I never have done, so I don't know what it's like to lose someone in a conflict. You might have lost somebody in a conflict. You might have had a relative, say, in Northern Ireland who was killed in the conflicts over there. You might have had a family member that was killed in a specific war. And now is the time to remember them and to give thanks that their life hasn't been lost in vain. Some people think, soldiers have given their life for nothing. And I always think there's nothing lost in a life given for something. And we might not always see what that life meant, but I think God sees it. And I think there's a plan and a purpose through that somehow. And so let's reflect. We'll reflect for 2 minutes on the fallen. And the Apostle Paul writes this in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. He says, "For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me.'" So if you can invite the stewards up to, I don't know if there's anyone on rota today, but if you